A hush falls over the Canadian Rockies at twilight, as if the very mountains sense when something unnatural stirs. Far below the jagged peaks, the Banff Springs Hotel rises like a medieval fortress against the backdrop of fir trees. Tourists and guests see only the grandeur, a historic stone edifice nicknamed the Castle of the Rockies, with hallways steeped in old-world charm. But behind its ornate facade, the corridors whisper with secrets. They say if you linger in the main lobby after midnight, you can spot a woman in a vintage wedding gown gliding silently along the edges of the marble floor. Some witness her vanish near the grand staircase. Others swear they hear her soft weeping echo down deserted hallways. Locals recount the tragedy. A bride tripped on her wedding train, fell violently down the curved steps, and died before she could utter another vow. Ever since, she appears, dancing in the shadows, her spectral form flickering in the dim glow of antique chandeliers. No one expects to encounter her until they do. And once they've seen her eyes, once they've heard her whispered pleas, they know these lavish walls shelter something restless and ravenous for the living. In the deep mauve of early evening, a lone shuttle bus pulled up to the circular drive of Banff Springs Hotel. Among the disembarking passengers was Claire Hastings, a freelance travel blogger invited by the hotel's PR team. She'd been commissioned to write a hidden gem piece highlighting winter attractions. Immediately, she felt the air's chill nip at her skin, colder than the outside temperature should allow. Her first impression was awe. Leaded glass windows, stone turrets, and a wide veranda reminiscent of a Scottish baronial castle. Bellhops bustled with suitcases. The setting sun cast elongated shadows across the lobby's plush rugs, highlighting the opulent reception area. Yet beyond the grandeur, Claire sensed an unsettling tension threading through the air. She approached the reception desk. A polite clerk, with eyes that darted nervously now and then, smiled.
"Welcome to the Banff Springs, Miss Hastings,"
he said, handing her a keycard.
"Your suite is on the 7th floor. Elevators down the corridor. To your right."
He gave her a conspiratorial wink.
"If you'd like to see the famous Ghost Bride's staircase, it's just around the corner. Right under that large Venetian chandelier."
Claire nodded politely, more curious than frightened. She'd heard the story, a tale of a bride who met her untimely fate decades ago. Just a local legend, or so she thought. Taking the elevator to her floor, she couldn't shake a sudden wave of vertigo. The air inside the lift felt stuffy, as though she were descending into the earth rather than rising to the 7th floor. With a soft ding, the doors opened. She stepped out, noticing how the hallway lights flickered once, then steadied. A momentary power surge, she assumed. Her suite was lavish. A canopy bed, antique furniture, drapes in shades of burgundy and gold. The windows looked out onto distant snow-capped mountains. She opened them, letting in a gust of frigid air that carried the faint scent of pine. Propping her suitcase against the wall, she flopped onto the cushioned chair near the fireplace. The hotel had provided a welcome to Banff Springs basket with brochures, local chocolates, and a neat little card that read, "Legend has it, dare to see for yourself." Before she could wonder about the cryptic note, her phone buzzed. An email from the PR manager reaffirmed her itinerary. A guided hotel tour the next day, dinner at a lakeside restaurant, plus a private exploration of the old ballroom. She locked her phone, brimming with excitement. Hauntings or not, she intended to capture the hidden elegance and charm that made the hotel so iconic. Night fell quickly in the mountains. By 9 p.m., Claire felt inexplicably drained. She changed into her pajamas and turned down the duvet, letting her eyelids grow heavy. Outside, a snowfall began, feather-light flakes shimmering in the glow of lampposts. That was when she heard it, an echoing hum, like distant violin music. She sat up, straining to listen. The melody swelled, haunting and melancholic, then dissipated as abruptly as it had arrived. Must be a wedding rehearsal or a private event, she told herself. After all, it was a wedding-friendly hotel. Nonetheless, a faint unease took hold, the kind that seeps in when you realize a place might hold more than you bargained for. Claire woke to the sound of her alarm. Bright sunlight streamed in, casting dancing shapes across the walls. Feeling more curious than ever about the ghostly bride story, she decided to visit the infamous staircase before breakfast. A short walk brought her to the mezzanine overlooking the main lobby. A swirl of crisp morning air rustled the hotel's thick drapes. The grand staircase commanded center stage, framed by carved balustrades and crowned by a massive chandelier. Sunbeams filtered through stained glass, painting the marble steps with shifting hues of ruby and sapphire. As Claire circled downward, she paused on a step that was slightly worn, as though centuries of footfalls had eroded its surface. Her fingertips brushed the banister, and a tremor of cold shot through her. She exhaled sharply, noticing a sudden hush. The morning bustle in the lobby seemed muted, as if muffled by unseen hands. She imagined the bride, radiant in white satin, descending these steps on her wedding day. She'd probably been brimming with joy, fully immersed in that ephemeral blend of anticipation and nerves. A corner of the bride's gown might have caught on a step, sending her tumbling headlong down the marble. Claire closed her eyes, picturing the horrifying instant when time suspended, the bride's breath catching as she realized she was falling. A swish of air startled her. She spun around. Nothing. Only the quiet hush of a centuries-old staircase. But a moment later, she caught sight of something faint. A flicker in the corner of her vision. A glimmer of white, dissolving at the edge of the chandelier's light. She blinked. Gone. The hair on her arms stood on end. She hurried to the lobby. A few tourists were snapping photos of the architecture. Determined to gather material, Claire struck up a conversation with a staff member, an older bellhop named Gerald. His deep-set eyes and gentle demeanor made him approachable.
Have you ever seen her?
Claire asked quietly. Gerald paused.
The bride, you mean?
Yes,
Claire replied.
I saw something. A shape, maybe. Just for a second.
Gerald gave a solemn nod.
A lot of people see her. Or feel her. Her presence is strongest on the staircase. And in the old ballroom.
He sighed, glancing around to ensure no visitors overheard.
I've worked here 30 years. I can tell you, there's something unsettled in these halls. Something that can't let go of that day. It ain't malicious. Sad, really.
He patted the brass trolley he was pushing.
But it's real. More real than most folks want to admit.
Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. She thanked Gerald, heart pounding, with an odd mixture of fear and fascination. There was a story here, one that might be more than mere folklore. And if the bride's spirit truly lingered, Claire would find it, or it would find her. After a hearty breakfast in the dining hall, where she observed more taxidermy and hunting trophies than she cared for, Claire decided to scout the corridors of the older sections of the hotel. The Banff Springs had expanded multiple times over the decades. Some wings were refurbished, while others felt lost in time. She explored a corridor on the 5th floor that was notably quieter. Old portraits lined the walls, their subjects gazing with regal disinterest. Cloaked in early 20th century garb, a faint musty odor clung to the air. Her footsteps echoed on the thick carpet, each step like walking through memory. The overhead sconces illuminated unevenly, leaving pockets of shadow to stretch ominously across corners. Claire paused by a painting of a bride and groom. The plaque read, Harold and Lillian Farnsworth, 1924. The bride's eyes seemed to follow her. A trick of old paint. Anxiety clawed at her stomach. Suddenly, she heard a hushed thud behind her. She whirled around, but saw no one. Goosebumps prickled her skin. The corridor was vacant, silent except for her own breaths. She kept walking, trying to dismiss the feeling that something was behind her. She reached an intersection where one corridor led back to the main hotel, and another angled sharply into an older wing seldom used. An antique sign reading "Service" hung at a precarious tilt. Intrigued, she ventured down the older hall. A single dim light flickered near the end, revealing a door with "Staff Only" etched into the frosted glass. She tried the handle. It gave way. Pushing it open, she entered a dusty service corridor lined with wooden panels. A sense of intrusion washed over her. Pipes hummed softly overhead, and the cloying smell of old cleaning chemicals lingered. As she took a few steps in, a door at the far end slammed shut, as if responding to an unseen gust. She froze, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her rational mind insisted it was a draft. Yet, the echo reverberated like a warning. Exhaling shakily, she inched closer to the door. The corridor lights seemed to dim, shadows lengthening. She reached out. Just as her fingertips touched the knob, a sudden pressure on her shoulder made her gasp. She spun around. Again, nothing. The corridor lay empty, silent. But the door behind her, the one leading back to the hotel corridor, clicked shut, leaving her momentarily in near darkness. Heart hammering, she forced the door open and darted back to the main hall. What unnerved her most was how quiet her voice had become in that moment, as though the atmosphere had swallowed her scream before it left her lips. She tried to steady her racing heart, realizing more and more that an unseen presence might actually be following her, testing her nerve with each turn of a corridor. That afternoon, Claire joined the official guided tour, hoping for a safer setting to gather information. The group consisted of a handful of retirees, a newlywed couple, and a few curious travelers. Their guide, a bright-eyed woman named Candice, pointed out historical artifacts and recounted tidbits of local lore. They visited the grand dining room with its vaulted ceiling and looming fireplace. Next came the outdoor terrace, offering breathtaking panoramic views of the surrounding mountains, the Bow River, and the evergreen forests sprawling below. The crisp, pine-scented air felt refreshing, temporarily lifting Claire's anxiety. However, she noticed something odd. Each time Candace mentioned the bride, a hush would fall over the group. A man in the back muttered a quick prayer under his breath. The newlywed couple exchanged uneasy looks. It seemed everyone was aware of the legend, though few cared to engage with it. Finally, Candice led them to the famed bride's staircase. Candice told the story with the soft practiced tone of a docent.
Many decades ago, a young bride in a flowing satin gown tragically fell here. Some say her heel snagged. Others claim her veil touched a lit candle, causing her to panic and lose her footing. No one truly knows. Since then, guests have reported seeing a woman in white drifting along the steps or waltzing in the vacant ballroom at night.
An uncomfortable silence descended. One of the retirees cleared her throat.
So, it's just a legend, right?
She asked, forcing a smile. Candace nodded diplomatically.
The official statement is that it's a local ghost story, but we encourage guests to decide for themselves.
They concluded the tour near a portrait of the bride, rumored to be the spirit in question, though the plaque offered no name. Claire studied the painting. The woman's face half-shadowed, eyes hauntingly expressive, lips fixed in a slight, almost sad smile. A hush came over Claire as she stood there. She could almost feel the bride's gaze lock onto her, as if to say, "You're next to know my secret." She shivered. By the end of the tour, her curiosity wasn't just professional. It felt personal. She wanted to discover the truth behind the legend, even if it meant stepping into places better left undisturbed. That evening, Claire's schedule included dinner at a lakeside restaurant a short drive from the hotel. She arrived just before dusk. Enormous windows revealed a partially frozen lake, reflecting the last orange glow of sunset. Candles flickered on the tables. Despite the cozy ambience, she couldn't shake her earlier unease. She found herself seated across from Simon Cole, a local historian the hotel had invited. He specialized in Banff's history and had written a few pieces on alleged hauntings in the area. Grey streaks threaded his sandy hair. Laugh lines creased the corners of his eyes. Over a bowl of steaming soup, he offered her a measured smile.
I heard you're writing an article on the Banff Springs. The marketing team wanted me to share some insights,
he said, sipping his drink.
I take it you've heard the bride story.
Claire nodded.
More than heard. I might have felt something.
Simon's expression turned serious.
The legend is more than a story. Local archives show that a bride died under mysterious circumstances. The official cause is recorded as an accident, but there were rumors of a fire near the steps or some sabotage. Nothing concrete, though. The groom supposedly left town shortly after. He remarried a year later, if memory serves.
Did you ever research her name? Any records of the bride herself?
Claire asked. Simon shrugged.
I tried. The hotel's official line has always been vague. Private wedding, old records lost in a fire, that sort of thing. But many staff claim they've seen her. The manifestation is strongest in the ballroom, especially at night. They say she's searching for her final dance.
Claire leaned in, heart thumping.
Why the ballroom?
Simon lowered his voice.
Because it was meant to be the scene of her happiest moment. Her first dance as a married woman. She never got that dance. Something about that unfulfilled promise keeps her bound to the hotel.
A hush settled between them. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, casting a ghostly reflection on the water's surface. Claire felt a chill that ran deeper than the frosty air. She sensed that uncovering the bride's story was bigger than a blog post. It felt like stepping onto a path that twisted through the darkest corners of the hotel's past. Simon offered a warm, albeit concerned smile.
Just be careful. Curiosity about the unknown can be inviting. The lines between the living and the departed can blur, especially in a place like Banff Springs.
She thanked him as they parted ways. His parting words lingered, echoing in her mind.
Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed so easily.
Determined to explore the heartbeat of the legend, Claire set her alarm for midnight. Dressed in a warm sweater and jeans, she made her way through the hushed corridors. The hotel was asleep, save for the occasional staff member or a jet-lagged guest wandering in search of tea. The ballroom was locked, but she'd been given special permission by the PR manager to photograph it at night. A single antique key in her pocket granted her private entrance. As she slid the key into the lock, her hand trembled. Something about crossing that threshold felt monumental, like stepping onto a stage set for a macabre performance. The door swung open with a groan. In the gloom, she could discern tall, arched windows draped in heavy velvet. Ornate chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals reflecting the moonlight that seeped through a narrow gap in the curtains. The vast space was eerily silent, as though time itself had ground to a halt. She set her flashlight on a table, the beam cutting across the polished floor. Dust motes danced in the light, swirling like tiny spirits. A row of tall mirrors lined one wall, making the space feel endless. Suddenly, Claire's phone beeped. A low battery alert. The sound reverberated like a warning in the emptiness. She switched it to silent, not wanting to shatter the fragile hush. She walked further in, each step echoing. A faint sound drifted to her. Soft lilting music, as though from a distant violin. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might echo too. She strained to listen, the melody growing clearer, weaving a tune tinged with sorrow. Then she saw it. In the reflection of the largest mirror, a figure in white. Claire gasped, spinning around. No one. She glanced back at the mirror. The figure was there, elegant, poised, wearing a tattered wedding gown that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. A veil cascaded around her shoulders, and her eyes glowed with a dull, sad luminescence. Her lips were parted, as if whispering a silent plea. Desperate to remain calm, Claire raised her flashlight. The beam cut across the open space. Still nothing there. The reflection, however, persisted in the mirror. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. She approached cautiously. As if drawn by an invisible thread, the bride's ghost began a slow waltz, her arms raised as though dancing with an unseen partner. The music, ephemeral and distant, underscored every step. Mesmerized, Claire found herself edging closer to the mirror. Her breath fogged up the glass. All at once, the ghostly bride stopped and faced Claire through the mirror. Their eyes locked. Claire's own reflection vanished, replaced by the bride's sorrowful stare. For an instant, she felt the temperature plummet. Every hair on her body stood upright. Then the vision flickered, dissolving into wisps of pale light. The next thing Claire knew, she was standing alone, the music gone. The moonlight turned cold. A sense of profound sadness washed over her, followed by a wave of terror. She scrambled back toward the door, nearly stumbling in her haste. The heavy door slammed behind her with a resounding thud, leaving the ballroom once more in silent darkness. Claire returned to her suite, trembling. After hours of restless sleep, she woke late, her mind awhirl with questions. Determined to glean more information, she contacted Simon Cole. They agreed to meet in the hotel's small library. An intimate room with walnut shelves and leather armchairs. A crackling fireplace added a semblance of comfort to the otherwise tense atmosphere. Simon had brought a small stack of documents.
I looked through some older archives. Thought you might want to see,
he said, laying out yellowed papers and black and white photographs. Claire leafed through them. An article from the 1920s about a lavish wedding at Banff Springs. Mention of a mysterious accident. Photographs showed couples dancing in the ballroom. In one blurred corner, a figure in white stood at the edge, her face obscured.
There's a rumor that the bride's name was Elizabeth.
Simon said.
She came from a wealthy family back east. The groom was from Calgary. This was supposed to be the social event of the season. But something happened the night before the ceremony. Some argument or tragedy. The staff were tight-lipped, but there was mention of a candle-lit corridor.
Claire's pulse quickened.
I felt something in the corridors. A presence, like someone was behind me.
Simon's eyes flickered with sympathy.
The bride didn't just die on the steps. There's speculation she was running from someone or something. Some versions say she saw a fire in the corridor and panicked. Others suspect foul play.
He sighed.
Whatever truth remains is hidden in the hotel's older records, or in the spirit that refuses to leave.
Suddenly, the library door creaked. Candace, the tour guide, entered hesitantly. She glanced around, then approached them with hushed urgency.
I overheard you two. Be careful. The manager doesn't like staff talking about the bride. They think it spooks the guests. But I've worked here long enough to see that the bride's presence grows stronger when people probe her story.
She threw a worried glance over her shoulder.
If you must search, try the sub-basement archives. There's a locked room where old ledgers and personal records were stored. But no one goes down there anymore. The staff call it the labyrinth. It's easy to get lost.
Claire felt a shiver that wasn't entirely from fear. It was also adrenaline. Another clue, another lead. She glanced at Simon, and he nodded, a resolute glint in his eye. They had come too far to turn back now. That night, with Simon at her side, Claire made her way to the sub-basement. They navigated the service elevator, which groaned with age as it sank below the main levels. A flickering fluorescent light greeted them when the doors wheezed open. Ahead stretched a maze of concrete hallways lined with pipes and storage rooms. The air felt heavy, damp. Rusted metal doors stood at intervals, some labeled with peeling paint, others unmarked. Their footsteps echoed eerily. Claire clutched her flashlight, scanning left and right. Occasionally, they passed old luggage carts, broken furniture, even dusty mannequins used for window displays decades ago. Each object seemed steeped in a silent history. At last, they found a locked gate blocking the path to a corridor leading deeper into the hotel's foundations. The padlock looked ancient. Simon produced a small bundle of lockpicks from his coat. Claire raised her eyebrows.
A skill from my wilder youth,
he murmured. After a moment's effort, the lock clicked. The gate swung open with a protesting squeal. Beyond it, the corridor curved sharply. They followed it to a wooden door with a plaque. Archives. Inside, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, flanked by shelves of old ledgers and boxes piled in disarray. Dust billowed in their flashlight beams, and the faint stench of mildew made Claire's stomach churn. They spent nearly an hour rifling through records, scanning for anything referencing a wedding from the 1920s. They found receipts for catering, musical performances, and guest registries. And then, at the bottom of a battered wooden trunk, they discovered a single folder labeled with a date, October 1923. Inside, they unearthed a brittle piece of stationery, an invitation to the wedding of Elizabeth Amherst and James Collingwood, dated October 15, 1923, to be held at the Banff Springs Hotel. Below the invitation was a note in shaky script. A tragedy has befallen the bride. Rumors swirl of a candle that caught her veil, but she was found at the foot of the stairs, her neck broken. Some staff suspect she was fleeing something. Her father insists it was a mere accident. The groom refuses to speak. I fear her spirit may never rest. Claire's hand shook. She could practically sense the sorrow etched into every letter. Finally, a faded photograph slipped out from behind the note. It showed a young woman with striking eyes, wearing a wedding dress. She stood in front of the hotel's grand fireplace. Her face bore a distant, almost haunted look. In pen, someone had written on the back, Elizabeth's last day. A sudden rush of cold swept through the room, extinguishing Claire's flashlight. Simon cursed as his phone screen died. The darkness became absolute. Then, faintly, they heard it. The echo of footsteps outside the archive door. Soft but deliberate, drawing closer. Claire felt her blood run cold. The handle rattled. Someone or something was testing it from the other side. A wave of dread crushed her chest. If it was hotel security, they might be reprimanded. But if it was something else? The footsteps stopped. A silence fell, so thick it seemed to smother them. They waited, hearts pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Then the handle went still. Nothing but the faint drip of water somewhere in the distant corridors. In a trembling whisper, Simon managed,
We need to leave, now.
They escaped the sub-basement and returned to Claire's suite, hearts still hammering. Claire felt a swirl of fear and empathy, as though she'd glimpsed Elizabeth's final hours. She couldn't shake the sense that Elizabeth was trapped, repeating her final moments in a loop of despair. Simon exhaled, running a hand through his hair.
There's more to this story. The note mentions suspicions she was fleeing something. Could be a family secret, or a threatening individual. Either way, her spirit's stuck.
Claire sank onto the edge of her bed, scanning the documents.
What do we do now? The block piece, that's overshadowed by the reality of this. I can't just ignore it.
He nodded solemnly.
You might try contacting her directly. Sometimes, addressing the spirit, acknowledging her pain, can provide a form of release. But it's risky.
A heavy quiet fell between them. Candace's warning echoed in Claire's mind.
The more they probed, the stronger the manifestations became.
That night, an oppressive tension weighed on the hotel. Guests complained of sudden drafts and flickering lights. An older couple insisted they heard footsteps pacing outside their door all night long. A young child swore she saw
A sad princess.
in the hallway. Whispers circulated among the staff, fueling an undercurrent of dread. Claire tossed and turned, unable to rest. She dreamt of Elizabeth on the staircase, blood seeping into her satin gown, reaching out for help no one could give. When Claire jerked awake, her cheeks were wet with tears. She realized she wasn't just investigating a haunting, she was living inside it. Determined to break the cycle, Claire decided to return to the ballroom on the next full moon, which happened to be the following night. She believed that confronting Elizabeth in the place she was meant to celebrate her marriage might help the spirit find closure. Simon accompanied her, armed with a simple digital recorder to capture any sounds. Candace discreetly provided a key again, though she urged caution, her eyes filled with apprehension. At the stroke of midnight, the two slipped through the lobby. The grand staircase loomed overhead, the silent witness to Elizabeth's final living moment. Candlelight from the corridor lamps seemed to quiver, as if anticipating what was to come. They entered the ballroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. The space was bathed in pale moonlight. Simon turned on the recorder, placing it on a table. Claire took a trembling breath.
Elizabeth,
She called softly, her voice echoing.
if you're here, we want to help you. We've seen your pain.
For a time, nothing happened. Then, far across the ballroom, a faint shimmer appeared. Claire's pulse accelerated. The shimmer coalesced into the faint outline of a bride, Elizabeth. Her gown glowed as though woven from moonbeams. She stood motionless, her head bowed. A sorrowful aura emanated from her, tugging at the edges of Claire's consciousness, stirring tears she couldn't explain. Then, slowly, Elizabeth lifted her head, revealing hollow, grieving eyes. Claire swallowed hard, stepping forward.
You never got your dance.
She whispered, voice trembling.
Is that why you're here?
The spectre moved, gliding across the floor. A faint, mournful melody rose from nowhere. Simon watched in stunned silence, stepping back to let Claire approach. With a deep sense of reverence, Claire extended her hand. She wasn't sure what she expected. Her hand to pass through empty air, perhaps. Instead, a bone-deep chill engulfed her fingers. Elizabeth's apparition took shape in front of her. Ephemeral, but real enough to send waves of dread and awe coursing through Claire. Their movements became a slow waltz, guided by the ghostly violin that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Claire's heart pounded so wildly, she thought she might faint. She locked eyes with Elizabeth's spectral gaze, and for a moment, it felt as though she glimpsed scenes of the bride's life. A candlelit corridor, an argument with a shadowy figure, a stumbling flight down the staircase, a final scream cut short by merciless marble steps. The dance ended abruptly. Elizabeth's form flickered, an anguished expression twisting her features. She raised a hand to her throat, as if reliving the fatal impact. A sudden gust of cold wind tore through the ballroom, snuffing out even the moonlight. Claire stumbled backwards, losing sight of the bride in the darkness. Simon aimed the flashlight, catching a final glimpse of Elizabeth's face, contorted in sorrow. Then the spirit vanished. The music ceased, leaving an aching silence in its wake. The following evening brought a winter storm that battered the mountains. Snow piled high against the windows, and the howling wind seemed to roar like a wounded animal. The hotel staff recommended guests stay indoors. Many complied, gathering around fireplaces, sipping hot cocoa or brandy. Claire, however, felt a pull she couldn't ignore. She and Simon agreed. The staircase was the epicenter of Elizabeth's tragedy. If there was any chance of breaking the haunting, it would be there. The lobby was deserted as they approached the top of the staircase. The chandelier swayed slightly, casting dancing shadows across the steps. Candace trailed a few paces behind, anxiety evident in her eyes. She wanted to ensure the safety of her new friends, or at least bear witness should things go awry. Claire held the photograph of Elizabeth discovered in the archives. She trembled as she set it on the banister.
Elizabeth,
She called.
you don't have to relive this horror. We know what happened. We know you were frightened. If you can hear me, let us help you find peace.
For a long moment, only the mournful howl of the wind. Then, a soft whisper, as if carried on that wind.
I never meant to.
The words dissolved into a low sobbing sound echoing off the marble. Before their eyes, the corridor lights flickered and dimmed. A cold spot formed at the top of the stairs. Slowly, Elizabeth's silhouette materialized. This time, her veil was partially torn, her eyes wild with the terror of her final moments. She turned to face the steps, replaying that fatal descent. Candy swallowed back a cry. Simon hovered protectively by Claire's side. As Elizabeth took a step forward, Claire realized the spirit was locked in the moment of her death, forced to reenact the fall. Acting on instinct, Claire rushed forward. She couldn't physically stop a ghost, but she extended a hand as if to catch her.
Elizabeth,
She shouted, voice resonating.
you are not alone. You don't have to fall again.
For a heartbeat, the bride's figure hesitated, flickering like a damaged reel of film. Her anguished gaze met Claire's. In that instant, Claire felt Elizabeth's sorrow like a tidal wave. The heartbreak, the panic, the fleeting hope that someone might save her. Tears streamed down Claire's cheeks. Then something extraordinary occurred. Instead of pitching forward, Elizabeth's ghostly form halted. She looked down at the photograph on the banister, recognized her own face. A fragile smile ghosted her lips. Time seemed to hold its breath. The air in the lobby crackled with energy. The chandelier's crystals chimed softly against one another. Slowly, Elizabeth raised a hand toward Claire. But instead of gripping her, she touched the photo. A bright glow enveloped the image, then spread across Elizabeth's silhouette. Suddenly, the wind died. The wail that had haunted the corridors ebbed to silence. Elizabeth's form grew radiant, shimmering like starlight. She gave Claire a final, grateful look, tears brimming in her ethereal eyes. And then, like the last note of a sorrowful melody, she faded. In the weeks that followed, the Banff Springs Hotel felt lighter, as though a lingering weight had been lifted from its ancient stones. Guests still heard rumors of a bride in white, but the sightings became less frequent, the atmosphere less oppressive. Claire wrote her article, weaving together the hotel's opulent charm with the poignant tale of Elizabeth. She didn't sensationalize the tragedy. Rather, she honored the spirit she'd encountered, portraying her as a figure trapped by heartbreak, now finally set free. Simon continued his historical research, updating records to include details of Elizabeth Amherst's life. Candace quietly helped guide staff to reframe the bride's story as one of compassion rather than fear. Months later, Claire returned to Banff Springs Hotel for a follow-up visit. Strolling through the lobby, she felt a subtle hush, but no longer sensed that suffocating sadness. Pausing at the grand staircase, she half expected to see a pale form in the corner of her eye. Instead, she found only soft morning light illuminating the marble steps, as though even the shadows had grown gentle. In the end, Elizabeth's final dance was completed not in a swirl of sorrow, but in a moment of connection. Her story acknowledged, her pain shared. Now the hotel stands as it always has, regal and imposing amid the Rockies. But for those who know the true tale, the Banff Springs is more than just a luxury destination with a tragic legend. It's a testament to how love and loss can intertwine across time, lingering like echoes in the corridors, until someone dares to reach out a hand and bring a restless spirit home. If you love mysterious stories, haunted legends, and epic history, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Don't forget to like this video and share it with friends.